Welcome to Hangar Talk, a video series of flying tips, comments, and anecdotes that promote airmanship, the artistry of flying with stick and rudder. Welcome to this second Hangar Talk in a three-part series titled Airmanship and Aerodynamics. In part one of this series, I made the case that loss of control during maneuvering continues to be a leading cause of GA fatalities. I suggested that more training is not the solution. Instead, pilot training should include airmanship, the effective use of the flight controls. I argued that pilots have difficulty performing maneuvers because of bad habits relating to the use of flight controls. Good airmanship and good habits derive from a pilot's understanding and adherence to the principles of aerodynamics. From a pilot's perspective, flight training about aerodynamics should emphasize understanding the science of flight and how the flight controls work. What do they do? Pilot training about aerodynamics should also emphasize using the correct control inputs to maneuver an airplane within its design capabilities. A sidebar, I remind you that modern aircraft are incredibly forgiving of the improper use of flight controls. Contemporary pilots are trained to fly well within the limits of the flight envelope. Consequently, pilots are generally unaware of their improper use of the flight controls to fly a specific maneuver. As an example, I cited how pilots routinely use the yoke to steer. In powered flight, there are four fundamental flight controls. Thrust, or power. Power relates to the concept of level climbing or descending flight. Almost all pilots know this, but in practice a pilot will frequently confuse a power change with an effort to control airspeed. Key point, use power to control altitude. We use ailerons to command roll. Too many pilots use the yoke as a steering wheel. For example, when flying a traffic pattern to a landing, they will steer through the crosswind, base, and final turns. Steering means using the yoke as you would drive a car. It is difficult to explain, but easy to demonstrate. The next time you fly, remember to set power and trim for level flight, and then establish a level turn. When established in the turn, make sure your feet are off those rudder pedals and let go of the yoke. If you have a habit to steer, you will be amazed at the greatly improved quality of a turn done with hands off. Key point, ailerons do not make an airplane turn. In a banked attitude, lift pushes the airplane through the change of direction. The elevator. The elevator controls angle of attack. Therefore, the elevator makes an airplane turn. The elevator controls airspeed. The elevator makes an airplane stall. Any one of those topics is worthy of an entire essay. My key point, proper use of elevator requires an in-depth understanding of angle of attack. Rudder. Rudder controls that pesky yaw. That would be rotation on the airplane's vertical axis. If you don't see yaw, you cannot control yaw. Key point, use and interpretation of the sight picture is a fundamental skill of airmanship. With reference to using the flight controls, understanding aerodynamics offers several guidelines. First, sight picture. Use the control you need when you need it as much as you need it. This is difficult for a pilot who does not master using the sight picture for attitude information. Pressure. A pilot must deflect a flight control from its neutral position to direct a response from the airplane. In pilot school, too many pilots learn to push the yoke forward and pull the yoke back. Never jerk, yank, push, or pull a flight control. Instead, use pressure to manipulate the flight controls. Learn to load, apply pressure, and unload, release pressure. Linkage. Fundamental principle of aerodynamics. And it states that rotation on one axis will cause rotation on another axis. Understanding linkage gives a pilot guidance for general use of the controls. For example, linkage helps explain the need for rudder to control pesky adverse yaw and the rarely recognized P-factor yaw. Linkage also offers a savvy airman more control options. For example, using rudder instead of ailerons to roll out of a well-flown chandelle. Newton's laws of motion. Aerodynamics, like many other fields of science, is founded on Newton's laws of motion. One of those laws states that every action causes another action. Newton's advice for pilots is, do not wiggle the flight controls. When a pilot unnecessarily moves the flight control, he causes the airplane to react in ways contrary to the pilot's intent. It's been a lengthy two-part introduction to my subject, Airmanship and Aerodynamics. I've argued 3 points. The quality of training, not the quantity of training, is the root cause of weak pilot proficiency and the unacceptable high occurrence of loss of control accidents while maneuvering. Decades watching pilots fly maneuvers has demonstrated to me that bad pilot habits relating to the use of flight controls is a common hindrance to good stick and rudder skills. I say that poor habits actually develop because of how we train pilots. Again, I should remind you that when flying modern airplanes well within the flight envelope, a pilot can grossly misuse the flight controls to direct a maneuver without any dire or obvious consequence. A better understanding of aerodynamics is a definitive training aid to pilots who aspire to be good airmen, to become safer pilots. In a final part 3 of this series, Airmanship and Aerodynamics, I will further develop those 3 points with an in-depth discussion of a fundamental stick and rudder skill that is largely unknown and rarely practiced. In fact, the skill is discouraged in pilot training. Ironically, I think it is the single most important flight control habit a pilot can have. In practice, it is the simple skill that saves lives and recovers unusual attitudes. Release elevator pressure. Unload before you deflect the ailerons. Unload before you roll. It's fundamental. It's good airmanship. In an emergency, that action will save your life.